For fun, the millionaire's son dressed up as a janitor and approached a girl in a Gucci dress to introduce himself, and the next day, Lucas was a 35-year-old handsome man and the son of a millionaire. He had received a good education and was now helping his father manage his massive corporation. Everyone adored Lucas for his charming smile and cheerful nature. He was lucky, and everything he set his mind to seemed to succeed. However, one thing troubled the young man: he couldn't find a girlfriend. Lucas was constantly surrounded by admirers, but he was 100% sure that they all wanted to be with him only for his money. "I'll remain a bachelor forever," he sighed. "But I really want to start a family and settle down." "I wish I had your problems," replied his best friend, Gustavo. He was also handsome, but not as popular as Lucas. "If I had that many admirers, I wouldn't worry about anything at all." But Lucas didn't listen to him. "I've been dreaming of a wife who will greet me after work for a long time. I'm tired of coming back to a cold bachelor apartment where no one is waiting for me." "Well, get a dog. Or a hamster at least," Gustavo suggested with a laugh, but Lucas just waved him off. "You don't understand me at all," Lucas said with frustration. "You just want to joke around." "And you take everything too seriously," Gustavo countered. They were sitting in a fancy restaurant, and flirtatious glances from single women in beautiful outfits fell on Lucas from all directions. However, the young man stubbornly ignored them. Some women even dared to come closer and, pretending to stumble, discreetly placed a business card or a napkin with a phone number on the table of the young friends. Lucas demonstratively avoided touching them. "It's time to go home, but I don't want to stand up," he sighed. "As soon as I head to the exit, half a dozen potential brides will pounce on me." Gustavo rolled his eyes. "Want me to distract them?" he asked. Lucas gave him an appraising look. "I'm afraid that won't work," he smirked. "The hunt is on me." "But I earn a decent living too," protested Gustavo. "Yes," Lucas nodded. "But you don't appear on the covers of glossy magazines 2 or 3 times a month." "What's true is true," Gustavo sighed. "You're the celebrity here." Lucas grimaced as if he'd swallowed a whole lemon. "I'd rather not be," he admitted. Gustavo took a sip from his glass and suddenly broke into a smile. "Why don't you dress up like a poor man and meet women like that? I don't think they'd recognize you so quickly without your Prada tuxedo, expensive sunglasses, and gold watch on your wrist." Lucas nearly choked on his champagne. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Why not?" Gustavo shrugged. "You might get 100 rejections, but if someone does agree, you'll know for sure that she's not after your money." Lucas thought about it for a long time. "The idea is certainly ridiculous, but it might be worth trying just for fun," he finally said. He decided not to put it off, and, the very next day, he went to his office and asked his assistant Felipe to get him a street sweeper's outfit and a broom. The young man with glasses, who worked as Lucas's secretary, raised his eyebrows in surprise at the boss's strange request, but didn't ask any questions. He nodded briefly, left his desk, and returned half an hour later with a large bag in one hand and a brand new broom in the other. "Here is everything you requested, Mr. Silva," the assistant said impassively, handing Lucas the bag. "Put the broom in the corner." Lucas nodded and disappeared into his office. After changing into the clothes from the bag, Lucas looked at himself in the mirror and nodded in satisfaction. Now he didn't look anything like a wealthy businessman. He completed the look with a pair of cheap sunglasses he found in one of the pockets, and then he left the office. The assistant looked at him but said nothing, pretending that nothing unusual was happening. Lucas grabbed the broom and headed toward the elevators. Fortunately, the corridors were not crowded at this hour, and the young man left the corporation building unnoticed. The guard at the door paid him no attention. Lucas slowly walked down the street, pretending to sweep the sidewalk. In reality, he was studying the women walking toward him. None of them paid him any attention, and this was very unusual for Lucas. Gradually, he reached an open cafe, where quite a few people were sitting. It was a hot day, and young women and men were drinking iced lemonade and juice, chatting about various topics. Lucas once again pretended to sweep the street while scanning the cafe's customers. Finally, he noticed a solitary woman sitting at the table furthest away. Lucas began to observe her carefully, trying not to let his gaze be noticed. The woman appeared to be about 28 years old. She had chestnut hair tied up in a bun and was wearing an expensive red dress. Lucas immediately recognized that it was designer-made. Probably Gucci, he thought. Famous designers often invited him to participate in shows, so the young man had some knowledge of brands. The woman was talking animatedly and emotionally on the phone, which Lucas couldn't quite identify. A couple of times, she seemed to sob, but perhaps it was just his imagination, or maybe she simply had a stuffy nose. Lucas decided that this woman was the perfect choice for his plan, and after waiting for her to finish her call, he approached her. "Good afternoon," Lucas said as pleasantly as possible. The woman started in surprise and stared at him. "Hello," she replied, not understanding what he wanted from her. "You are very beautiful," Lucas said, flashing one of his most charming smiles. "I was sweeping the street, I happened to notice you, and I just felt like giving you a compliment." The woman smiled shyly and, as it seemed to Lucas, a bit wearily. "Thank you," she replied. "That's very kind of you." Lucas leaned his broom against the wall and spoke to the woman again. "May I sit at your table?" he asked, mentally bracing himself for a refusal. But the woman smiled and nodded. "Of course," she said. Lucas sat down, feeling very strange. He had expected that a woman in an expensive dress would immediately turn him down. "My name is Lucas," the young man introduced himself. "And I'm Veronica," the woman replied. "Nice to meet you." "The pleasure is mine," said Lucas and dared to ask, "You must be very wealthy?" "Why do you think so?" Veronica smiled in response. "Your dress. It's designer-made, isn't it?" Veronica glanced at her crimson outfit and, for some reason, blushed. "Yes, it's from the latest collection. I bought it today," she said quietly. Lucas thought that this realization didn't seem to make her particularly happy. "And I'm just an ordinary street sweeper," he said, swallowing a lump in his throat. He didn't know why, but he no longer wanted to pretend to be someone he wasn't. Looking into Veronica's blue eyes, he felt awkward, knowing he was deceiving her. "It must be difficult for you," the girl said sympathetically. "Working outside every day under the scorching sun." "That's right," Lucas replied. He felt deeply ashamed for misleading Veronica so shamelessly. After all, he never went outside during the day, sitting instead in his comfortable, air-conditioned office chair. Veronica was silent. It was clear that she was struggling with her thoughts. Lucas watched her closely, not knowing what to say next. The conversation clearly wasn't going well. You shouldn't start a relationship with a lie, Lucas thought to himself. He suddenly realized he wanted to continue talking to Veronica but no longer wanted to deceive her. "You know, I should get back to work," Lucas said with regret. Veronica nodded and suddenly looked over Lucas's shoulder. "Oh, what's that?" she gasped. Lucas turned around but didn't see anything unusual. "What do you mean?" he asked, casting a puzzled look at Veronica. She just shook her head. "No, it was just my imagination," she said, standing up. Lucas stood up with her. "I should be going too," Veronica said. "It was nice talking to you." Lucas nodded. He desperately wanted to ask for her phone number, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. "How can I tell her I'm a well-known businessman and the son of a millionaire after all this charade?" he thought bitterly. Veronica slowly walked down the street, and Lucas watched her go with regret. He had missed his chance to get to know a beautiful girl and now blamed himself for it. "But I would never have noticed her if I hadn't dressed as a street sweeper," he thought, sighing as he headed back to his office. His broom was still leaning against the wall. Back in the office, Lucas took off the street sweeper's clothes and tossed them onto the leather sofa in the corner of his office. He sat at his desk and started working diligently, trying to forget Veronica's blue eyes, which still lingered in his mind. That night, he slept very poorly, replaying the events of the day in his head, and early the next morning, he went to the office. Gustavo was already there, waiting with the report on the work he had done. Lucas glanced through the documents and, finding them satisfactory, nodded to his friend. "Everything is perfect as usual. You can get back to work," he said. Gustavo protested, "I worked on that report all night. Can I at least have breakfast and some coffee before turning into a workhorse again?" Lucas laughed. "Of course," he replied. "I haven't had breakfast either. I could offer you some coffee with croissants, if you don't mind." "I don't mind at all," Gustavo said contentedly. He spun around in his chair a couple of times and then noticed the street sweeper's clothes on the leather sofa. "What's this pile of junk?" Gustavo smirked. Lucas followed his gaze and frowned. "Don't remind me. I need to tell the secretary to get rid of that." "What is it?" Gustavo insisted with a laugh. "I hope it's not a new office dress code." Lucas stood up and walked over to the sofa. "You suggested this idea yourself. Have you already forgotten?" he grumbled. Gustavo thought for a moment, then slapped his forehead. "You mean dressing up as a poor guy?" he exclaimed. Lucas gave him a grim look, holding the jacket and pants in his hands. "Seriously? You did it?" Gustavo asked incredulously. "And how did it go?" Lucas didn't answer. He walked around his desk and called the secretary. When the young man entered the office, the businessman said, "Felipe, please make us 2 espressos and bring some croissants. And take this outfit away." "What should I do with it, sir?" Felipe asked. "Get rid of it," Lucas said curtly. Felipe nodded and took the street sweeper's clothes from his boss's hands, leaving the office. But within a couple of minutes, he returned with the same jacket and pants. "Sorry, Mr. Silva," the assistant said awkwardly. "I accidentally put my hand in the pocket. I usually check pockets before sending clothes to the laundry, so I did it automatically." "And?" Lucas said impatiently. Felipe handed him a small folded piece of paper. "This was in the pocket," the young man said. "I thought it might be something important." Lucas took the piece of paper, unfolded it, and froze. "Was this definitely in the pocket?" he asked Felipe, who nodded in response. Lucas sat down in his chair, staring at the paper. "What is it?" Gustavo asked. "Felipe, you're dismissed," Lucas said without looking at the young man. His eyes were still fixed on the paper in his hands. "Will you tell me or not?" Gustavo asked, losing his patience. Lucas looked up at him, dazed. "It's a check," he said simply. "What kind of check?" Gustavo asked, confused. "I'm not sure. But the amount is not small. Did you put it in the pocket and forget?" Lucas shook his head and ran his fingers through his hair. "That's the thing, I didn't put it there," he admitted. Gustavo was baffled. "Then who did?" Lucas turned his back to him and walked to the window. It could only have been Veronica. "Veronica who?" Gustavo grumbled. "Can you explain properly or not?" Lucas turned to his friend and collapsed into his chair. "Yesterday, when I dressed as a street sweeper, I met a beautiful girl named Veronica. She believed I was poor and spent all day sweeping the streets, and apparently, she decided to help me." Gustavo stared at his friend in amazement. "Wow," he exclaimed. "I thought girls like that didn't exist anymore." Lucas gave his friend a dreamy look. "Neither did I. But Veronica is special. I knew it from the first glance." "You're lucky," Gustavo smiled. Lucas flinched at his words and came back to reality. "But I didn't get her phone number," he shouted in frustration, jumping up from his chair. "What an idiot," his friend replied. At that moment, Felipe returned with a tray, setting down steaming cups of coffee and plates with croissants. The friends fell silent, allowing the secretary to place the refreshments on the table and leave. "So, what are you going to do now?" Gustavo asked as soon as the door closed behind Felipe. "I have to find Veronica and return her the money," Lucas exclaimed. "But how?" Gustavo asked, pulling a croissant toward himself. "Our city is not small, and finding someone without any contact information will be difficult." "That's obvious," Lucas replied gloomily. He took a sip of coffee and winced. "What's her last name?" Gustavo asked. "What does she do? Where does she live?" "No idea," his friend said, shrugging. "All I know is her name and that she was wearing a red dress from the latest Gucci collection, which she bought just yesterday." Gustavo took a bite of his croissant and nodded approvingly. "That's something. You could check the shops near the place where you met her and ask about her there." Lucas looked at his friend as if he'd been insulted. "I hate shopping," he growled through gritted teeth. "But you want to find her, don't you?" Gustavo pointed out reasonably, finishing off the last piece of his croissant. "Yes, I have to," Lucas said determinedly. With that, he stood up, ignoring the cooling coffee and untouched croissants, and rushed out of the office. Gustavo watched him leave and shrugged. "Could have said goodbye to your best friend," he muttered to himself. Then, after thinking for a moment, he took Lucas's croissant and ate it with pleasure. His friend, meanwhile, was running at full speed toward the cafe where he had met Veronica the day before. He held on to the faint hope that she might be there again today. But the girl in the red dress was nowhere to be found. Lucas then called over one of the waiters and asked if there were any boutiques nearby that sold designer clothes. The waiter just shrugged in response and suggested that the young man ask another waitress. "Anna knows more about boutiques than I do," he said with a smile, pointing to a tall girl with small curls all over her head. Lucas rushed to her like a madman. Anna said that there were several boutiques with expensive clothes from well-known designers a few blocks away from their cafe, and she pointed out the direction. Thanking her, Lucas hurried in that direction. 10 minutes later, he noticed the bright shop windows and headed into the first boutique. There, they told him that they hadn't had Gucci dresses in stock for a long time. Lucas quickly went to the next shop, but he was disappointed again. However, as soon as he stepped into the third boutique, a triumphant smile appeared on his face. He immediately noticed the familiar red dress on a mannequin near the entrance. "How can I help you?" a pretty, short brunette with a long braid down her back addressed him. "You see," Lucas began, "yesterday a young woman named Veronica came into your store. As far as I know, she bought the exact same dress." With these words, the young man pointed at the mannequin dressed in the scarlet outfit. The girl furrowed her brow slightly as she listened to him. "Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "This dress only arrived today." "Really?" Lucas responded in disappointment. The girl shrugged in reply. He realized he had hit another dead end. "Why are you looking for her?" the girl asked casually, but Lucas detected a note of tension in her voice. "She left her phone in my office," he lied confidently. "I'm lying a lot lately, but I think I might actually be able to find Veronica," he thought to himself. After saying goodbye, he left the shop, pretending to walk up the street but actually turning the corner and sneaking up to an open window. He overheard the girl talking to someone on the phone. "I was so scared. He asked if I knew you. And he even said that you forgot your phone in his office." What a bold-faced lie. Lucas held his breath. No, he heard the girl's voice again. He doesn't look poor. Quite the opposite. He's wearing a very expensive designer suit and a gold watch. She paused for a moment, listening to the person on the other end. And his eyes. "I think they're brown, but I'm not sure. Looks to be around 35. Yes, quite handsome. But you know how deceiving appearances can be." The girl fell silent again, and Lucas bit his lip, trying to curb his impatience. "Do you know him? Did you meet at the cafe?" "Veronica, I told you that. Lucas didn't wait to hear the rest. He ran back to the entrance of the shop to catch the girl by surprise. When he entered, she gasped in shock. "Did I scare you?" Lucas asked. The girl stared at him with wide eyes filled with terror, still holding the phone to her ear. "Yes, he's back," she whispered. "Are you sure?" "Okay, I'll do it." With that, the girl ended the call. "So, you do know Veronica after all?" Lucas asked. The girl nodded, clearly embarrassed. "Veronica is my sister," she admitted. "What did she say?" The girl hesitated a moment, then quietly replied, "She said that if you really want to see her again, I can give you her number." Relief washed over Lucas, and he felt a warm sense of hope. "Yes, I really do want that," he confessed sincerely. "Then write this down," the girl said and began to dictate her sister's number. Lucas saved it in his phone and, after thanking her, headed back to his office. Once there, he sat at his desk and sent a message to Veronica, "I need to return something to you. Your acquaintance from yesterday, Lucas." The reply came soon enough. "What do you mean?" Veronica asked. "The receipt I found in my jacket pocket," Lucas replied. "But didn't you already spend the money? My sister said you were wearing an expensive suit and had a gold watch." "How could a simple janitor afford all that?" the girl wrote. "I'll explain everything to you." "You're a very generous person, but I don't need your money," Lucas typed back. Then he thought for a moment and added, "Tell me the time and place, and I'll come by to return to you what rightfully belongs to you." Veronica remained silent for a while, and Lucas feared she wouldn't respond at all, but then a new message appeared. Veronica sent him the address of the Central City Library and the time, 7 p.m. "I wonder what she's doing there. Could she be that into books?" Lucas thought. "I'll wait by the entrance," he messaged back and put his phone away. It was time to get some work done. Half an hour before the appointed time, the young man went to the parking lot and got into his car. He reached the city library by the agreed time and waited for Veronica to appear. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Lucas saw a girl emerge from the building. She had chestnut hair tied up in a bun and blue eyes, just like Veronica's. But her outfit was very modest. She wore a simple white shirt and a gray plaid skirt. Lucas rubbed his eyes several times to make sure it was indeed the same girl he had talked to in the cafe yesterday. He quickly got out of the car and went to meet her. Seeing him, Veronica stopped, and her face reflected utter astonishment. "Hello, Veronica," Lucas said. "I hope you remember me." "Hello, Lucas." "Barely," the stunned girl replied. "Maria told me your suit was expensive, but I didn't think it was that expensive." "I'll explain everything to you now," Lucas said. "If you'll let me." Veronica nodded and pointed to a nearby bench. "Let's sit here," she suggested. When they sat down, Lucas turned to Veronica and said, "Yesterday, I wasn't who I really am." The girl frowned in confusion at his words. "I pretended to be a janitor for fun," Lucas admitted. Veronica gasped and lowered her gaze. "In reality, I'm a very wealthy man," he continued. The girl didn't look at him. "So the money you so kindly offered to give me, I don't need," Lucas concluded, handing Veronica the check. The girl made a strange sound, like a sob, and took it. Lucas could feel the tension in the air. "Why are you silent?" he asked. "And why won't you look at me?" "I don't like this," the girl admitted, raising her eyes to him, filled with anger. "I don't understand who gave you the right to deceive people. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you can treat others like this." Lucas was taken aback. He hadn't expected his confession to provoke such a storm of emotions in Veronica. "But aren't you rich too?" Lucas remarked fairly. "You were ready to give a fortune to a complete stranger. And that expensive Gucci dress you were wearing yesterday." Veronica bit her lip to keep from crying. "You don't understand anything," she exclaimed, jumping up from the bench and running off. Lucas didn't know what to think. He had a feeling he had deeply offended her. But how? He couldn't figure it out. He thought it would be best to forget about Veronica, to push her out of his mind, but he couldn't do it. Her genuine emotions showed that she was a very sensitive person with a big heart, and Lucas realized that he liked her even more. That evening, he texted Veronica, apologizing for upsetting her. She didn't reply. Lucas didn't know what to do. He couldn't forget her blue eyes. Before falling asleep, he suddenly remembered her simple shirt and modest skirt. Could she be pretending to be poor too, he thought. But Veronica's words suggested the opposite. It clearly wasn't an act. I don't understand anything, Lucas thought as he drifted off to sleep. The next day, sitting in his office, he kept trying to solve the mystery that had been troubling him since the day before. Why did she dress like that? If Veronica is really poor, then why did she buy an expensive dress and give me money? Lucas wondered aloud. Are you talking to yourself now? Gustavo asked, peeking into the office. Anyone would, Lucas grumbled. Gustavo walked in and sat in the swivel chair opposite his friend. How's it going? He asked. Did you find your mysterious stranger in the designer dress? Lucas just sighed in response. I found her, but I couldn't hold on to her, he admitted. What happened? Gustavo asked, and Lucas told him everything. Gustavo thoughtfully rubbed his chin. That's a very strange story, he said, lost in thought. His friend agreed. And it's odd why her sister works in a store if this Veronica is so rich that she's willing to write a check for a significant amount to a stranger janitor, Gustavo noted logically. There are more questions than answers here, Lucas had to admit. The friends discussed everything that had happened for a while, but didn't come to any conclusions. The best thing for you would be to forget about this strange girl, Gustavo concluded. Lucas nodded, knowing it would be hard to do. Veronica's image was stuck in his mind. When Gustavo left, Lucas tried to work, but he couldn't concentrate. He left his office, intending to ask Felipe to make him some coffee, but Felipe wasn't in the reception area. He must have stepped out for something, Lucas thought. His eyes suddenly fell on a cardboard box under Felipe's desk, with the corner of the same jacket he had worn as a janitor sticking out of it. Lucas stared at it for a moment, then walked over, picked up the box, and carried it back to his office. It seemed Felipe hadn't had the chance to get rid of the clothes yet. Not fully aware of what he was doing, Lucas changed back into the janitor's uniform, locked his office door, and then stepped outside again, heading toward the elevators. This time, several people in the hallway stared at him in surprise, but Lucas pretended not to notice. He left the building and wandered down the street aimlessly, eventually stopping by the cafe where he had first met Veronica. Of course, she wasn't there. Lucas continued walking. He went to the city park, wandering its shaded paths for hours, enjoying his solitude and the anonymity the disguise provided. As dusk approached, he left the park and kept walking. The further he went, the more the upscale neighborhood transformed into rundown buildings. He kept going, not knowing where or why, but the walk helped clear his mind. Eventually, he noticed a dim sign of a bar and decided to go inside. No one paid any attention to him. Lucas sat at an empty table by the edge and ordered a non-alcoholic drink. He didn't like drinking, especially when he was alone. While he waited for his drink, he heard a woman's laughter from somewhere to his left, and he turned his head automatically. He was stunned to recognize the two women sitting there, looking at a phone screen and laughing. It was Veronica and Maria. Lucas couldn't help but smile as he noticed that this time the girl who had so intrigued him had her hair loose, cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. She was wearing a simple black top and jeans. Lucas frowned again, wondering what double game this mysterious girl was playing. He completely forgot that he, too, was dressed as a poor man for the second time. The women didn't notice Lucas and continued chatting and laughing. He wasn't sure what to do. Should he approach them or observe from a distance? Maybe he could learn something if he listened to their conversation. But they were speaking in low voices, and it was impossible to make out what they were saying. At that moment, a loud roar of motorcycles echoed from the street, and a group of bikers burst into the bar. Their leather jackets and heavy boots gleamed in the light, and their faces wore cocky grins. They ordered drinks and took over the largest table in the middle of the room, blocking Lucas's view of Veronica and Maria. The bikers behaved as if they owned the place. One of the bikers approached the girls, trying to strike up a conversation, but Maria politely told him they weren't interested in talking. However, the guy didn't give up. He stood up from his table and walked right up to the girls. There was a small area in the bar for dancing, and it seemed he intended to invite one of the women to dance. But the girls shook their heads again. Then the biker grabbed Veronica's slender wrist and started to pull her towards him when Lucas suddenly appeared in front of him. "The lady said she doesn't want to dance," he said quietly but firmly. Veronica and Maria stared at him in surprise while the biker slowly turned his flushed face towards Lucas. "Did you say something, pretty boy?" he asked. "I said," Lucas repeated clearly, "that the lady made it clear she doesn't want to dance. Let her go." The biker's friends started to get up from their table to join him. "And who are you to care?" the guy asked roughly. "Are you their bodyguard?" "That doesn't matter," Lucas replied, looking the biker straight in the eyes with defiance. "I think it matters a lot," the biker said, clenching his fists. "Maybe we should step outside and talk," one of his friends suggested. Lucas shivered but didn't break eye contact. "I don't think that'll be necessary. Just go back to your table and keep your hands to yourself," he said firmly. "Is he giving us orders now?" the bikers muttered angrily. Lucas felt the tension building. If only Gustavo were here, he thought wistfully. He knows how to handle these situations. He pictured his friend, who would do everything possible to avoid a fight and protect his face. Gustavo would use any tactic if he thought he couldn't win in a brawl. And then, Lucas had an idea. "All right. Let's step outside," he said, hearing Veronica gasp. "They'll beat him up," she whispered in a barely audible voice. But Lucas headed for the exit confidently. The bikers laughed and exchanged comments as they followed him outside. Once they surrounded him, preparing for a fight, Lucas said, "I'm not going to fight." "Chickened out, huh?" the biker sneered, pleased. "It's not worth it," Lucas shook his head. "We can settle this peacefully. Those girls are my cousins. I got my paycheck today and brought them to this bar. They're under my protection, and I had to stand up for them. But I'm willing to buy you guys all the drinks you want. Tonight, I'm feeling more generous than ever." Lucas's words changed the mood of the boys who were ready for a fight. "Cousins are sacred, of course. But we won't turn down a drink," said the ringleader, and Lucas smirked with satisfaction. He was glad he hadn't forgotten to put the janitor's credit card in his jacket pocket. The issue was resolved. Everyone returned to the hall almost as friends. Veronica and Maria looked at the guys in surprise, not understanding how they had calmed down so quickly. Lucas sat at the bar, discreetly paying for the bikers' drinks. A little later, Veronica approached him. "Thank you, Lucas," she whispered in his ear. He smiled and nodded in response. "But why are you wearing those clothes again?" Veronica suddenly frowned. Lucas just shrugged. "I don't know what came over me. I guess because it makes me feel more alive." Veronica raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Is being a millionaire really that bad?" "Not bad," Lucas said seriously. "But it's very monotonous. And lonely. Everyone wants to be with you, but only because of the money." A look of sympathy flickered in Veronica's eyes. "But you should know that as well as I do," Lucas added, gazing intently into her blue eyes. "You're rich too, or you wouldn't have graced me with that check." "You don't understand anything," Veronica replied, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean to offend you," Lucas said quickly. Veronica pulled herself together and said, "Let's meet tomorrow, and I'll tell you everything." Lucas was delighted to hear those words. He hadn't dared to hope for such luck. "Agreed," he replied. "I'll text you." Veronica nodded and headed for the exit, where Maria was already waiting for her. The next day, Lucas picked Veronica up at the library and took her to his favorite restaurant, located in a picturesque spot near the central waterfront. Lucas and Veronica sat by the window, which offered a beautiful view of the city lights and the bridge over the river. "It's so beautiful here," Veronica said, enchanted. "Yes," Lucas agreed with her. They placed their order, and the waiter immediately brought them drinks, along with roses in a crystal vase. "The flowers are from the gentleman for the lovely lady," he said. Veronica blushed and smiled at Lucas. "I'm very touched," she said. Lucas took a sip of juice and whispered, "Tell me everything you wanted to say." Veronica hesitated for a moment, gathering her strength, and then began her story. "Maybe you've already figured out that I'm not rich at all. I'm just a simple girl who works at a library." Lucas didn't believe her words. "Are you serious? Then where did that check come from?" Veronica sighed and continued, barely holding back her tears. "I had a regular visitor, Senor Castro. He was an elderly man. If I'm not mistaken, he was almost 90 years old. But every week, he came to the library without fail to return books and borrow new ones. He loved to read. Senor Castro wore thick glasses and used a large magnifying glass, but he never gave up his favorite activity. 'I'll be reading even on my deathbed,' he often said. He was also a big fan of lotteries. He bought lottery tickets as regularly as he visited the library. Though he never won, he never lost faith. 'Someday, I'll win and buy a van to make a library on wheels,' he loved to say. Then, one day, he stopped coming to the library for a long time. Later, his grandchildren came and told me that Senor Castro was no more." Veronica paused to wipe away a tear that rolled down her cheek. "He died in his sleep after lunch, and his family found him lying on the couch with a book pressed to his chest. It was so touching. His grandchildren returned all the books that Senor Castro had borrowed from the library. In one of them, I found a lottery ticket." Veronica paused again to catch her breath. "And it was a winning ticket?" Lucas guessed. Veronica nodded. "I found out by accident. Maria also buys lottery tickets and had turned on the TV on a Sunday morning. I couldn't help but compare the numbers, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Senor Castro's ticket had won a huge amount of money. Enough to fulfill his dream." Veronica looked at Lucas with sad eyes, and he instinctively took her hand. "What a shame he didn't live to see it," he whispered, and Veronica nodded. "I tried to give the ticket to his grandchildren, but it turned out they had just moved to another country and didn't leave their address. The neighbors said they'd been planning to leave for a long time, but couldn't abandon their old grandfather." Veronica fell silent with a sigh. "So, you kept the ticket?" Lucas finished for her. "Yes," she replied. "I received the money but wasn't sure if I could spend it. I thought about donating it to charity. My sister convinced me to buy a fancy dress for myself. 'Treat yourself at least once in your life,' she said, and I agreed." "So, I saw you on that very day?" "Yes," Veronica nodded. "I bought the dress at the store where Maria works, then headed to the charity organization, but on the way, I got hungry and decided to stop at a cafe." "What a lucky coincidence." Lucas marveled. "When I heard you were struggling with your job, I decided to give you the money," Veronica confessed. "You felt sorry for me?" Lucas smiled. "And you tricked me," Veronica replied in mock outrage. "Now I understand why you were upset and angry with me when you learned the truth," Lucas said with relief. Veronica's smile faded, and a frown appeared on her face. "What's on your mind?" Lucas asked, concerned. "I still don't know what to do with the money," Veronica admitted. Lucas took her hand again. "But isn't it obvious?" he exclaimed. "Really?" Veronica asked, surprised. "Of course," Lucas replied confidently. "You need to fulfill Senor Castro's dream." Veronica looked at him for a moment, trying to grasp his words, then her face broke into a smile. "Why didn't I think of that sooner?" she exclaimed. "Because you were waiting for me," Lucas replied simply. They had a wonderful evening, and the following week, Lucas helped Veronica choose a van, then hired craftsmen who beautifully painted it with bright colors. "The library is ready, now we just need books," Lucas said, pleased with the result. Together with Veronica, they went to various stores and bought the best books, spending over 2 weeks on the task. All these activities brought Lucas and Veronica much closer, and they became true friends. However, both felt that something more lay ahead for them. Their instincts didn't deceive them. They genuinely fell in love with each other, and 6 months later, Lucas proposed to Veronica. They got married and traveled a lot in their book van, stopping in different towns, where people joyfully read the books they brought.